89.1 FM Rich Radio Hashtag Surmount Kalangitan Kaheaven.
A great day to all senior high school learners of Kalangitan High School. I'm your Sir Mel Santos and welcome to another virtual study session in 21st century literature from the Philippines and the world. Now have your paper and pen handy for note-taking along with your self-learning module as we are about to engage in another literary adventure. So set your mind and heart, have yourselves feeling at ease and focus to get the most out of learning from today's topic. So this is the sixth of the 7-part series of virtual learning for our topic, 21st century literary traditions and forms from different cultures. And this episode will be about the literary movements in English literature. So again, let's keep in mind our learning goals for the entire 7-part series of this virtual learning. Identify the 21st century literary traditions and forms of different cultures, notably English literature for this episode. Distinguish the differences of these 21st century literary traditions and forms of different cultures from their established or classical literary conventions, and appreciate the 21st century literary developments of different cultures. So mga ka-heaven, let's get started to roll.
Right is the ring of words when the right man rings them. Fair the fall of songs when the singer sings them. Still
English literature is the body of written works produced in the English language by inhabitants of the British Isles, including Ireland from the 7th century to the present day. The history of English literature begins with the Germanic traditions of the Anglo-Saxon settlers. Beowulf is the earliest and most popular work in Old English literature. As the Normans conquered England, Middle English replaced the Old English and was used by the father of English literature, Geoffrey Chaucer, in his famous work, The Canterbury Tales. William Shakespeare came to be considered as the most iconic and greatest writer in the history of English literature, as he is revered for his legendary plays and sonnets. The history of English literature is spread over important different periods, including Old English literature, medieval English literature, Elizabethan age or the Golden Age of English literature, Restoration Age, the 18th century English literature, the Romantic period, and the 20th century literature. The earliest known period of English literature is the Old English or Anglo-Saxon literature, which ran from 5th to 14th century. The famous works of Old English literature are the narrative poems or epics Beowulf and Widsith. Beowulf is considered as the first English epic poem. Beowulf is an important work of English literature because it contextualizes historical culture and heroic literary themes during the formation of modern English history. The main plot of Beowulf concerns Beowulf's heroic defeat of the monster Grendel and later his mother. This narrative poem was so popular that it was even adopted into a computer-animated film directed by Robert Zemeckis. Some of the other famous works produced during the Old English literature include Genesis, Exodus, The Wanderer, Wife's Lament, Husband's Message, The Battle of Maldon. Other famous writers of Old English literature were Cynewulf and Caedmon. Medieval English period of literature ran from 14th to 15th century. Also referred to as the later Middle English literary period, the medieval English literature comprises of a diverse range of works as the population of England during this time was literate and a considerable portion was also bilingual and trilingual. Geoffrey Chaucer is amongst the highly regarded poets within the period of 1342 to 1400 and was renowned for his courtly love poetry, including the famous Canterbury Tales. William Langland's famous religious works, including Piers Plowman, also deserves a crucial mention as it represents another popular genre of this period of English literature, which was secular and religious prose. During the era of medieval English literature, the most esteemed works also include morality plays, miracle plays, and interludes. Every Man was a noted morality play of the time, and miracle plays were taken from the Bible and were frequently performed in churches. Bringing a distinctive paradigm shift in the history of English literature, Elizabethan Age or the Golden Age of English literature, which ran from 16th century to early 17th century, represents the brilliant century of all the periods and is also known as the Golden Age. The Golden Age in the history of English literature brought a gallery of authors of genius and literary masterpieces. It was a dynamic age filled with intellectual and religious revolutions and upheavals. Moreover, literary dramas have a crucial role to play in making this age golden. From Hamlet, King Lear, Othello, Julius Caesar, or Midsummer Night's Dream, As You Like It, and Romeo and Juliet. William Shakespeare contributed many historical dramas and tragedies, as well as romantic plays and comedies to the Golden Age. Notable writers of the Elizabethan era also include John Milton, John Webster, Thomas Kidd, George Peele, Ben Jonson, amongst others. Another revolutionary change in the history of English literature was brought forward by the Restoration Age, which ran from 17th to 18th century. This period immensely reflected the political conflict of the late 17th century. One of the prominent writers for the Restoration literature was John Milton, a well-known controversialist who wrote the famous Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. Milton's Paradise Lost is a poem of epic proportion that tells of Satan's attempt to mislead Eve into disobeying God in the Garden of Eden by eating from the tree of knowledge. In his sequel poem, Paradise Regained, Milton shows Satan trying to seduce Jesus in a similar way to Eve. Thomas Gray, William Blake, Robert Burns are unavoidable names whose literary work has been highly acclaimed. The eminent philosopher of this era was John Locke, who wrote many essays like the Essay Concerning Human Understanding, and most of his works delve deeper into the unraveling the workings of the civil society, as well as debate and exploration of the human intelligence. Next is the 18th century English literature. Political literature and novels. were introduced not only to the whole of British Isles but to the whole world. Robert Harley, Daniel Defoe, and Jonathan Swift were amongst the major writers of this era. Daniel Defoe experimented with the prose narrative and wrote a novel called Robinson Crusoe. He was one of the esteemed and prominent writers to introduce novel writing to the literary world. Richard Steele and Jonathan Swift are also some of the popular names in prose writing, as they were renowned for their satirical style of writing. Next is the 19th century Romantic Age of English literature. The 19th century Romantic Age of English literature experimented with the earlier forms of poetry and brought many interesting genres of prose fiction. It was this period when the literary movement called Romanticism in poetry emerged. The key feature of Romanticism was the emphasis laid on individual thought and personal feeling. William Blake, William Wordsworth, and Samuel Taylor Coleridge were the brilliant poetry geniuses of this era as they curated glorious works rooted in nature, love, romance, as well as contemporary thought. The later Romantics were Shelley, Keats, and Byron, who carried on the legacy in the 20th century. The novels of this era were written as a form of entertainment to the now literate public and were a stern commentary on many prominent events such as the French Revolution. The Gothic novel was an important invention in prose fiction, and some of its prominent writers were Horace Walpole, Matthew Lewis, Anne Radcliffe, and Mary Shelley. Gothic novels cover horror, death, and at times romance. On the other hand, Jane Austen stood by the conservation form of prose fiction through popular romantic novels like Pride and Prejudice, Emma, Persuasion, Northanger Abbey, to name a few. And we are now down to the 20th century of English literature. The modern history of English literature began with the beginning of the 20th century. Rudyard Kipling is considered as one of the greatest writers in this century. He was born in India and then moved to Lahore and was a supporter of colonization. His main works include Kim, Life's Handicap, apart from the significant book, The Jungle Book. Some prominent contributions to the 20th century literature were E.M. Foster's A Passage to India, H.G. Wells' The Time Machine, The Invisible Man, First Man on the Moon, to name a few. It was also during this period when stream of consciousness literary style emerged, which we have already come across in our previous study session of world literature, historical development, particularly in modern literature or literary modernism. Again, stream of consciousness is a technique that attempts to depict the infinite thoughts and feelings which pass through the mind of a narrator. In stream of consciousness, the speaker's thought processes are more often depicted as overheard in the mind. It is more of an interior monologue where the character only talks in his mind without doing the actual talking or the verbal expression of his thought process. You hear the character speak, but only through his mind. It's like overhearing his own thought process speak. The other characters in the story wouldn't really hear or see this character who does the act of stream of consciousness, but it is only us, the audience, who would be able to hear, or in the case of a novel, it is only us readers who would be able to see, as described in words, the act of stream of consciousness done by the character. Famous English authors of the 20th century who made use of stream of consciousness technique include Dorothy Richardson for her book Pointed Roofs in 1915, James Joyce for Ulysses in 1922, and Virginia Woolf for Mrs. Dalloway in 1925, and then another one for Virginia Woolf which is entitled To the Lighthouse in 1927. D.H. Lawrence has the greatest contribution to this century. James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, George Orwell, William Golding, John Galsworthy, George Bernard Shaw, Harold Pinter are some of the prolific names during this period. In an article published at Britannica.com and also included in your module, it says, as the 21st century got underway, history remained the outstanding concern of English literature. Although contemporary issues such as global warming and international conflicts, especially the Second Persian Gulf War and its aftermath, receive attention, writers were still more disposed to look back. An example of this is the novel Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell, which we already came to know in our previous module. It tells a tale of interconnected stories that take the reader from the remote South Pacific in the 19th century to the island of Hawaii in a distant post-apocalyptic future. Although it contained chapters that foresee future eras destroyed by malign technology and climactic and nuclear devastation, it devoted more space to scenes set in the 19th and early 20th centuries. Another example is also one of the 21st century authors we came across in our previous module, McEwan's Atonement, published in 2001, worked masterly variations on the 1930s fictional procedures of authors such as Elizabeth Bowen. Although they had entered into a new millennium, writers seemed to find greater imaginative stimulus in the past than in the present and the future. All right, that ends the sixth of the seven-part series of virtual learning on 21st century literary traditions and forms from different cultures. Bye for now, mga ka-heaven!
89.1 FM Rich Radio. Hashtag Surmount Kalamitan Ka-Heaven.